In addition to being an executive producer, in the later days of my career with EA, I was actually a vice president. In practice, I'm not sure that vice president in large companies actually means very much because you have a bunch of better vice presidents that layer on top of that. You have senior vice presidents and executive vice presidents and super duper secret double vice presidents. But one of the things that came along with being a vice president is I had an executive assistant, or at least I shared an executive assistant with some other people. So what's an executive assistant? What do they do? And are they a good idea? I don't know that I took full advantage of what an executive assistant can do, but here are some of the things that my executive assistant did for me. She would manage my calendar to make sure that people could find slots to have meetings with me because my days were very full of meetings. So having someone that could spend their time to manage and juggle your calendar was very necessary for me. She did all of my expenses and she booked all of my travel. Other people got a lot more out of their executive assistants. I know people who had their EAs completely do all of their email and then only send things through that they deemed to be worthy of the other person's attention. There are people for whom their executive assistants make all of their PowerPoint presentations or pick up their dry cleaning or get them lunch every day. Now, one of the reasons why I didn't make as much use of my executive assistant as other people might have is because I was leading a project which had hundreds of people on it. So in a way, I had access to a lot of other resources as well. Where someone else might use their executive assistant to take meeting notes, I would have that done for the most part by producers on the project, which makes a lot more sense because if you have access to those people, because they are actually on the project, they have greater context than your executive assistant has, and they're able to integrate and synthesize those notes better, more effectively than someone whose job it is to report just directly to you and doesn't have that project context. So in a way, I actually had access to the same kinds of force multipliers that someone who had a full-time dedicated executive assistant has. It's just that my resources were spread across an executive assistant and then a bunch of other people. Now, as you work with an executive assistant, they start to know you, and this can help streamline things even further. My executive assistant knew that when I flew, I didn't really care that much about what hotel I got, but I cared that I got an aisle seat when I flew because I wanted to be able to get in and out of the plane as quickly as possible. And also that I didn't want to sit beside certain coworkers while traveling because I wanted to work while traveling, and some people are very, very chatty. This kind of relationship that you have with your executive assistant further smooths out some of this stuff that you're doing day to day because they're able to model what you're looking for because they're able to spend more time doing these things than you probably would have done on your own. The more time you spend with an executive assistant, the more effective they're going to be at meeting your needs day to day and doing the things that you need. The idea here is that this person is really important. Their time is very valuable. Therefore, it's worth having someone whose job it is to remove friction from their day, to take on the things that can be done by other people. And on the surface, that makes a lot of sense because certainly if I was having to manage my own calendar or book my own travel, that's another thing that's distracting from me doing the job that I'm being paid a lot of money to do. So it does make sense in that way. One of the downsides that I see with these kinds of tiered perks that most people in your organization don't get, and then at some level they kick in and you start getting them, and then maybe when you get up really high, they're even better or more advanced, is that they have a tendency to disconnect people from the other parts of the organization. If your travel booking system is a complete nightmare, well, if you have an executive assistant, they can spend 2 or 3 hours booking your travel. But if you don't have an executive assistant, then that is a burden you're putting on these people that you are not aware of because you're not doing it. The person who is in charge of deciding whether or not to spend some money to fix the travel booking system isn't using that system. And this can become true for lots of different things. Doing your expenses, even booking lunch or figuring out when meetings can be allowed to be. If you're used to always having someone making sure you eat in the middle of the day, then you don't really worry about having a meeting over lunchtime. Whereas someone who has to handle all of that on their own has to be much more cognizant of that. So while I agree with the philosophy of focus people on the things that they're getting paid for as much as you can, you also want to make sure that you don't disconnect, especially your executives, too much from the organization as a whole, from the way that other people think. If all you do is spend your time around other millionaires because you are at the upper echelons of an organization, and all you spend your time doing is interacting with the other executives at your organization or executives at other organizations, that can cause you to have an incredibly skewed view of the world. And one of the things you're asking for most of your executives is for them to understand the way that the business works. And understanding the way that the business works means understanding the way that your potential customers work. If you become so disconnected from the day-to-day of living a life because there's someone there to wipe your chin when you eat soup, then you lose that ability to actually do your job. This issue applies to a lot of these perks that kick in at the upper echelons of an organization. If you always travel business class or by corporate jet, you're not considering the impact of a lot of business travel on your people. You may be concerned about how much things are costing, but you're not really considering the fact that they're spending hours at the airport and then climbing into an economy seat to cross the Atlantic Ocean, whereas you are taking the private jet or at least flying business class. And so the impact on you is much diminished compared to the impact on other people who are having to do the same thing as you. So you can start to underconsider the impact that things are having on the rest of your people because your lived experience isn't the same as theirs. That disconnect can result in a weird shock when the situation changes. If you have always had an executive assistant and you've always flown business class, or at least you have for more than a decade, and now you're a private citizen, you don't have an executive assistant anymore. I don't know how to book my own travel, and I haven't traveled economy in more than a decade. So I haven't been on a plane since I left BioWare, but likely the next time I fly, it's going to be economy. And I suspect it's going to be incredibly difficult for me to figure out how to book my own travel. And I'm going to really resent having to sit in this sardine can of economy. I think executive assistants are incredibly valuable. I think that they provide a service and they're worth it. But I do think that you have to try to be cognizant of the blind spots that they are potentially introducing in the way that you see the world. A special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. What do you think about these kinds of perks that kick in above a certain level of seniority? Do you think that they shouldn't exist? Do you think that if you're going to have something like this, they have to be made available to everyone? Let me know down in the comments. If you found this video interesting, give it a thumbs up because that tells YouTube that it's worth sharing to more people. We have merch now. This is You May All Now Celebrate, briefly. If you're interested in picking up any merch, there's a shelf below this video as well. I will see you again soon. Thank you.